I've been scribbling a lot because this week's chapter is about finding the courage to be epic. And I started the week off with this idea of like, don't chase perfection, chase average. And I wrote that down without knowing how to articulate what I was really trying to say, which is, how do we choose to be epic? And what does epic mean? And how can we ensure that everything we do, we take an approach of being epic? What's up, Durga? And the idea of epic is not reserved for the elite of us. It's not for the best of us. It's a mindset that anybody can adapt and adopt. The idea of being epic is different than perfect, which is what I was realizing over this week. You know, perfection means you want to control the outcome. It's about competing versus creating, because you're trying to make sure everybody else thinks whatever you're doing is perfect. You know, the perfect Instagram account, the perfect job, the perfect marriage. Perfection is something you project for the rest of the world. IV, what up, Johnny? But when you think about being epic, it's a feeling, it's a commitment. And that's what I was trying to explore this week for this chapter of, how do we adopt a life where we approach things from how do I be epic in everything I do? From going to school, to finding a mate, to working out, to your side hustle, to your main hustle. Whatever it is, how can you be in a mindset of, I want to be epic? And my guest really helped me open up my mindset. Because when I first started this week, I was asking myself, how do you achieve perfection? And that's not the right question. And I was telling myself that it's okay to be average from a mindset perspective, because you protect yourself. How often do we say, hey man, I don't want to try much harder because it's not going to happen anyway, so why set myself up for failure? And in avoiding failure, we settle for average. Can you imagine that? Think about that. If you consciously choose to be average because you perceive whatever it is that you want to do is not going to work out anyways, and you settle for average. And it sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud. No, why would I settle for average? I want to I want to get the best. But human beings, we have an incredible ability, okay? We have an incredible ability to talk ourselves out of things even before we try. It's a gift that only we have. A dog doesn't have it. A cat doesn't have it. An elephant doesn't have it. We do as human beings. We have this beautiful innate ability to talk ourselves out of doing things by imagining a future that hasn't happened today. And if we understand that mindset and we go, man, why am I choosing to be average when I could demand more from myself? And if perfection is something that is other people's version of me, because you can't really achieve perfection, I can choose to have an epic mindset. And that's what this chapter is turning into, this ideology around how do we have an epic mindset in everything we do. And an epic mindset is uncomfortable, because you gotta, like, by default, get out of your current framework. I found this when I was cleaning my son's room yesterday, and it's broken, but there was like this little piece of glass here, and every time you look through it, you'll see a very fractured world, different light sources coming in. And I remember, from like the age of 2 to maybe 3, he would constantly play with this. He would look through this little widgety, which we got off a dollar store somewhere, for hours. Everything was new looking through that thing, right? His room looked different. The living room looked different. Food looked different. Our faces looked different. And the difference created a different energy. A childlike response to, I want to dream big. I want to achieve different things. And I feel like we remove that. We get that little childlike approach to life early in life. And then over the course of becoming an adult, you're a teenager now, you got to shut down this part. You're a young adult, you got to shut down this part. You're a working professional, you got to shut down this part. You're about to get married and have kids and have accountabilities, you shut down this part. And we start to just shut down a whole bunch of these things by force. And the young version, the little version, the one that looks through the little glass thing where everything is epic. I see my kids play now. They don't play to be average. Everything they do is epic. Pretending the couch is a cliff and they're trying to scale it. It's an epic mountain adventure. Drawing something, it's an epic portrait. Anything. Because when you're childlike in your approach to things, why would you want to be anything different than epic? How many of us grew up taking on an alter ego of a superhero? Right? Mine was Superman, man. Everything I did, I want to be as good as Superman. Epic. And over time, we're told Superman is a character, is a movie, it's made up, fix your head, you can't do shit, you don't have superpowers. But when we start to think of ourselves as in a mind frame of epic with whatever we want to do in life, we give ourselves permission to feel like that again and reimagine some of the superpowers. I get on stage at Desi Fest. My superpower is my confidence. I'm not confident in a lot of things in life. I have an imposter syndrome. The way I grew up in life always forces me to push myself forward because my natural state of being is I'm not good enough. I don't deserve to be here. This is not an opportunity that's for me. That's my natural state of thinking. Can you imagine that? That's what's been beaten into my head from a very young age, that I'm not good enough. So that's my natural state. And everything that I do, I need to put myself in a mind frame of epicness to break out of that little bit of a gap. And I know what it was done. I look back and I'm like, yeah, my parents wanted me to be average to protect me from perceived failure. And that's the gift human beings have. Self-sabotage before something is even real. We assume the worst and we don't even take the first step. They assume the worst. So they tried to protect me by changing my mindset that I deserve to be average because that's safe. And epicness is failure. And so that's all I know. And at 45, I still default to that narrative. And it takes effort and conscious thinking to tell myself, no, I'm going to build the greatest show possible. I'm going to start the best company in the world. I'm going to have an amazing marriage. I'm going to be the best father. I'm going to be the best friend. I'm going to be the number one supporter because my default is different. And I think that's what I was trying to get across in this chapter of Be Epic, is a mindset that forces you to break out of your natural thought of being average. And being average is also a defense mechanic, right? By expecting less, you force yourself to go through less pain and you settle for the result because you're protected. I'm not going to try really, really hard in school if I'm going to get a 70 anyways. Why do I want to pressure myself into thinking I deserve a 95? But you don't realize that just because you didn't get the answers right doesn't mean you don't know the answers. Let that sink in, man. So much of our life experience is sitting in here, ready to jump out when you need it, not because you need to pass a test. And what you absorb subconsciously is 10 times, 100 times more than what you think you absorb. So our human check marks don't reflect our true capability to absorb knowledge and retain knowledge. So it forces us to think we need to be average. What if I make 1,000 phone calls, man, and nobody picks up my call? I don't make $1. Okay. But you can't settle and be average because the idea of being epic scares you. And that's, one of the things that we've been really working on in this chapter to get across. Because I don't know what the formula is up to now. It's only now that I look back on my 25 years of entrepreneurship and mistakes and hustles that every time I defaulted to average to feel safe and protected, I lost 100%. Even though it looks like we made some money or we did something, positive, I always lost as a human because I trained myself that average is right. So that's what we started this week off on, what does perfection mean and how do you stay average? And what we're really saying at the end of the week is, how can you live a life where you believe you could be epic? And that epic is an emotion. It's a feeling. It's a way of thinking. There's no actions to it. It doesn't cost you $1. You haven't invested anything into anything. You haven't made a phone call. You haven't done anything. You're simply telling your brain, the next thing I'm going to do, whatever it is, it's going to be epic. It's going to be big. It's going to be scary. It's going to be amazing. And whatever the actual results are is not as important as how I'm going to operate. That's the win. And it lowers your pressure instantly because you're not worried about the results anymore. And it allows you to take risks. One of the greatest lessons that I hope you take away from the eventual book and these morning conversations is risk is the secret sauce. Taking a risk is how we figure out what we're made of. In anything you're doing, every little risk you take forces your brain to rewire the neurons. And it forces you to become a little more uncomfortable. But both is where growth is. And every time you grow a tiny bit more, a 1% growth, your entire life changes. And it's a very, very huge thing for people to understand. We don't teach this in school. We try to mitigate risk. We try to white label, a safe life. But the greatest moments where you learn about yourself is risk, man. I still remember the very first time I started my company. It was a risk. I'm in 4th year, ready to graduate, and I'm getting no's in all these job interviews. Microsoft, KPMG, Accenture. I'm getting nervous. I'm like, man, I put in 4 years into this university, paid thousands of money, and it's going to be true. It's going to be true what they said. It's going to be true that even after university education, I'm not going to go anywhere in life. Nobody's going to give me a job. That was only 4 interviews. People are doing 20, 30, 50, 100 interviews to get a job. I did 4. And my brain was already telling me to be average and settle because the risk of going through another 100 no's wasn't something it wanted me to do. And I was like, man, imagine if I graduate and I don't get a job. Everything my dad said is true. I am dumb. I am useless. I can't make it. I can't hack it. Even with a university education, nobody would fucking want to hire me. And that thought was so much louder in my head than, let me make another phone call. Let me send out another 10 resumes. Let me see if I could get a job. And I said, okay, well, if getting a job is not something that my brain naturally does and is so afraid, then let me do something that my brain has no framework for. Because nobody in my household has started a business before. And nobody in my family that I know of is an entrepreneur. So let me start a business so that my own brain doesn't have a blueprint to back down. So starting a business for me was a huge risk. Without even knowing what the hell I was doing, other than the more I stayed in where I was, which is looking for a job, the more my brain was going to tell me again that I don't deserve a good job. I don't deserve a high-paying job. I don't deserve it, which is all I heard growing up. So I need to sidestep to my brain completely. And the biggest risk I've ever taken was starting my first company, Spider Designs. And because there was no blueprint, I was able to make hundreds of phone calls every single day. And we're talking phone calls, guys. This is like 25 years ago with no social media. You literally had to go get a big-ass Yellow Pages book. You open it up, you looked up a name and number, and you made a phone call. It said, hey, my name is Satish. I have a company. I'd like to work with you. And making those hundreds of calls every single day was much more risk-free in my head than applying for another job, because that was an average framework I already was given. And when I was making 100 phone calls and people were saying no, or you're a student, or what the hell is this internet thing, and I don't want to pay you, it was easy for me to take that hit and then dial again because there was no framework in my head. I was epic from the beginning. I knew that there was no rule books for this version of what I was doing. So I went all in, and I made thousands of phone calls that turned into hundreds of clients that turned into thousands of dollars. And my brain was completely useless to me because it didn't know how to react to a framework that it didn't know how to shut down. And that's what I mean by epic. When we give ourselves permission to feel epic, our brain doesn't know how to protect us. It doesn't know how to defend you. It doesn't know how to keep you safe. The noise of be average disappears eventually. And this idea of epic takes over. And as my guests have said this week so far, it gives you the ability to create new habits. You're not a morning person, you're going to become a morning person. You don't like to journal, you're going to journal. You don't like to make 1,000 phone calls, it becomes easier to make the 1,000 phone calls because you've given yourself permission to put yourself in a different mind frame. That for me is what this chapter is about. Hundreds of micro stories that we can share in it. Those of you that are watching, I hope that's what you get from this week's conversations. That at the end of the day, don't chase perfection. Know that your default setting is average. That's the safest path to get through life. Be average. Take very little risks. Don't learn more about yourself than what you need to. And you'll have a good life. This is not to say average is bad. This is not to say average is below standards. I know tons of people that are super, super happy. My wife, when we first got married, we were dating, and then we got married, and then you really got to know somebody once you start to live with them, right? It's not like other cultures where we could live together for years before we get married. This is, you want that girl full time? You got to put a ring on it. I was like, okay, I'm going to put a ring on it. And I started to get to know her more. And her mindset is average. And for the longest time, I hated it because I'm doing epic. And I was like, wait a second, how could I be epic and go and push and break rules and learn more about myself and take risks? And here's somebody who's cool, average. Get up, have breakfast, go to work, have lunch, come home at 4:35, watch TV for a bit, have dinner, read a book, go to bed, happy. It used to bug me to a point where I used to question, did I marry the right person? Did I end up with the right person? Did I settle? Did I move too fast? And I realized that whether I'm choosing epicness, my wife is choosing average, what both of us wanted to get to is a sense of happiness. And for her, that was happiness. Having her routine, knowing what she's worth, knowing what her time is like, knowing what makes her happy, living that life was happiness. And I'm looking at it from the outside going, oh man, why don't you want more? Why don't you want to be more epic? It's not a gauge of your life being less than mine. It's about happiness. And that's ultimately what we all crave. And if you are happy with the way you're living, and that's giving you the happiness that you deserve, amazing. But if you're not, and there's a little voice that says, I could do more, I need to do more, I need to ask for more, it's the ask for more part that we're not taught how to do. And most of us shut down because we don't believe we deserve it, or it's not going to happen to us anyways. And that's the part where the idea of epicness comes into play. Looking back now, I'm lucky enough to have a very traumatized youth, man. You know, growing up in that household was horrible. Constantly being abused and constantly being reminded of how shitty life is. That helped me think the way I think. And I figured out what happiness is for me through this process of thinking epicness. But some of y'all don't need to, and that's okay. But if you are questioning things, if you are wondering, man, something is off, or how can I change something, whether it's business, life, health, relationships, know that you got to break the mold. Because the default version we all have is to be safe and average. And to do anything of value to get to the next level, you have to be able to take a risk. And the only way you're going to take a risk is to force your brain that you need to stop being average in whatever that is. I'm battling that today, for all my dad homies, Karim, Nick. I've got a dad body. And for most days, I'm okay with it. Because my wife said, oh, you look good, man. And my kids, think I look okay. And I look at myself and I'm like, I got a little bit of a belly and whatever. It's cool. But I got the dad bod. I'm okay. Meanwhile, what I crave is 4-pack. Being able to push heavy again. And being happy with how I look and feel. But I'm settling for average because I haven't given myself the right reason to push through the pain to get to the next level. The pain is holding me back from the result that I want. So I'm happy, convincing myself I feel good. And that's something that I'm consciously now working on. Why am I afraid of the pain? How do I fall in love with the pain? How do I think of an epic body? Where at 50, I want to take my shirt off on the beach and have a 6-pack and look good. But I know the work that has to go into that epic thinking. And being average and settling and being okay with what I have. It's not going to give me that feeling of epicness. And the minute I switch that switch on, I'm willing to put the pain in and putting the work in. I see my boy Karim, 5 a.m. every morning, up and running. And that's the battle. that we're all in. How much of our life is average and makes us happy? How much of our lives do we want to be epic to make us happy? And what is the balance between the two? Because if you're constantly in epic mode, you're going to burn out. If you're constantly in average mode, you're going to be stale. You're going to be unhappy. And it's finding the balance between the two that this chapter focuses on. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. As we put this chapter together, I hope you guys are having fun with these morning sessions, and it's adding a bit of value. Hopefully a new voice in your life that gives you a new perspective, even if it's not to change your mindset, but to question your mindset, which is all I can hope for. Which is what I ask for myself, to go, man, be open enough to hear other voices and opinions, to question your belief system. And then you make a decision on what's important for you. And areas of your life that you're happy with, and they're good, and they're average, and they're awesome, great. Areas you're unhappy, really focus on how do you change your mindset and think about, feeling epic. And perfection is not something that we can create a plan for. It's other people's opinion of what you're doing. So we don't put any weight into it. You can't control if somebody thinks you did something perfect or not. What you can't control is your ability to say, I want to be epic in everything I touch. That is important to me.